Hello, everybody. I hope you can all hear me okay. Thank you for joining us tonight. I say us, it's me. So my name's Heather Devey. I'm the project officer for the Cumbria Beaver group. So tonight we're going to have a bit of an introduction into Cumbria's latest residents, which is very exciting, Eurasian beavers. Find out all about beavers, or as much as we can cram into the kind of limited time that we've got. If you do have any questions, there should be a kind of chat function to the right-hand side of your screen. If you want to have a friendly discussion, you're very welcome to do so. And Melanie from Cumbria Wildlife Trust is on the other side of this, and she'll be marking the questions as they come in, and I can answer those at the end. I won't be answering them throughout. We'll wait until the end. So shall we begin? So the Cumbria Beaver Group is made up of the RSPB, the Cumbria Wildlife Trust, the Lowther Estate and the Eden Rivers Trust. But of course we work with the likes of Natural England, Forestry England, United Utilities, the University of Cumbria, the Environment Agency, lots of different stakeholder groups that might have an interest in the reintroduction of beavers in the long term, but also currently at Lowther. Before we begin, so you might have noticed recently, and I'm sure that's why you're all here, that the very first beavers to be reintroduced to Cumbria have arrived at the Lowther Estate. So first up, we're going to have a bit of an introduction to beavers, so you know what I'm on about when I'm talking about the Lowther reintroduction. First of all, a very, very brief history of beavers in Britain and kind of where it all went wrong for them. So beavers have been extinct in Britain for around about 400 years or so. There were never, or there's currently no evidence that they were ever present in Ireland, and that's why we say Britain and not the UK. So they were hunted primarily for three things: their meat, their castoreum, and their fur. And I'll explain kind of the history behind some of those very briefly. So their meat, first of all, they were hunted particularly in the medieval times because they were deemed to be a fish. They were classified as a fish. So the Roman Catholic Church allowed or permitted the eating of beavers, particularly on Fridays, because they were considered a fish. And we'll find out soon, of course, that they are in fact a mammal, despite them spending the majority of their time in water. They were also hunted for castoreum. So this image, or this set of images here, tends to alarm any guys that might be watching. And these are from medieval bestiaries. They're fascinating books that give us kind of a bit of an insight into where some of our misconceptions of species might have begun. But they're basically, it's where rumours really kind of take hold, and the visual imagery of animals are depicted in bestiaries quite inaccurately based on these rumours passed down from those who did observe them. So these three images here, these are of beavers, and you can just kind of see the paddle tails on some of them, not so much the bottom left one, but more alarmingly, you can see that they're actually chewing off their testicles. And as you can see in the text there, it says, whose testicles are excellent medicine. So castoreum, it used to be believed, came from beaver testicles. And when you come across a beaver, they don't actually have any external genitals, despite them being a placental mammal. And they're really fascinating because of this. So beavers actually have what's called a cloaca, which is present primarily in birds and amphibians and reptiles. Really, really unusual in mammals, particularly placental mammals. And as you can see in the little diagram, so they're essentially like a fleshy vent, and it's got a threefold duty of scent secretion, reproduction, and waste disposal. Both sexes have these, and this is why when you come across a beaver, they don't have external genitals. So back in the medieval times, when they came across beavers, they used to think that they chewed the testicles off to avoid being hunted for this castoreum. But in fact, these are produced in an internal gland called the castor sacs, and both sexes have these castor sacs. So they were hunted very heavily for these for this castoreum, this chemical compound in castoreum produced in the castor sacs, because it was used as a pain reliever, it was used as a cure for epilepsy, an aphrodisiac, a bit of a cure for all. And there is actually some truth in it having pain relieving properties, because of course beavers eat willow, and willow contains salicylic acid, which is actually one of the chemical compounds for aspirin today. So there is some kind of truth in it, but thankfully we actually have aspirin now. Another reason beavers were hunted, one of the largest reasons in the end that really kind of pushed them toward the extinction, was their fur. So prior to the Middle Ages, beaver pelts were only deemed to be used for royal society. So they were a very high value item. And then later on, around about the 1550s to the 1850s, beaver hats became top fashion. They were highly fashionable. So these are all beaver hats, because beaver fur, it has all of these lovely waterproofing materials, but when it's felted, it can be manipulated and coloured into any shape, any colour, any style that you want. So high society gripped onto these beaver hats, and this really, really pushed beavers to extinction almost in Europe as well as in Britain. So by this point, hunters were actually heading across to North America, which was one of the only places that beavers remained. So that's Castor canadensis, not Castor fiber, our Eurasian beavers. It's a different species. And that's where kind of a lot of our trade deals started with America, as it happens, quite controversially as it turned out. But we exploited beavers to extinction, and now thankfully we've finally welcomed their return only recently. So as you can see from this very brief introduction to their history, there's a lot of misconception around beavers already in our kind of cultural heritage. And now that we're bringing beavers back, we don't want to start off on a bad foot. We want to reacquaint ourselves with this amazing species that we literally co-evolved alongside. So if I can just show you a video, bear with me. So beavers are semi-aquatic rodents. They're the second largest rodent that we have in Europe. Males and females will breed for life, generally a pair, and they breed round about December to March, and they have their kits round about May time, and they have up to 2 to 3 kits per year, but family units tend to be up to 12 individuals or so, and we'll have a little look at their anatomy soon. I hope you can see this video okay. Oh, let me bring back. We're all getting used to this technology, aren't we? There we go. So they've got their anatomy is entirely evolved for an aquatic lifestyle or a semi-aquatic lifestyle, because of course they are terrestrial, but they rely entirely on water. So their dispersal, even when they disperse between habitats, they disperse in a linear way along water courses. They don't like to be away from water. So their anatomy is entirely evolved, and it's amazing to match this aquatic lifestyle. So for example, here, we'll have a go through here. Let's start at their fur. They've got really dense underfur with thick guard hairs on the top, which are perfect to keep them warm, but also to waterproof, which unfortunately led to them being made into hats, of course. But beavers rely on this waterproofing because they spend so much time in water. Their hind feet are webbed to help with their swimming, but their forefeet are non-webbed. So they have 5 digits, just like we do. Slightly smaller thumbs, admittedly, but just like we do. And they use these to care for their young, to groom themselves, to gather food underwater. And we'll have a look at their food soon. And just to carry kind of building materials and things. So they're not really webbed, but their hind feet are. Their tails are those distinctive kind of scaly paddle tails that you might have seen pictures of. Unfortunately, they don't use them to slap mud on dams, despite how much I watch. They've never done it, and the cartoons promise that to me. But they use them also to balance. So they walk upright quite often over water, over land, over water. Wouldn't that be amazing to see? When they're carrying their sticks and things until they get to the water for their construction materials. They use it as an alarm system as well when they slap it on the surface of the water, which alerts others of a threat, and other species have learnt this as an alarm as well. They also store fat and regulate temperature, so they exude heat in the summer. So beaver tails are really, really important things to beavers, not just food as we once deemed them to be. Let's head to their face. So you can see the kind of profile of the face there is really flat. And when you see a beaver in the water, that tends to be all you see. And they're nocturnal, I should probably mention. So best time to see beavers is, I find, sunrise, but you can see them at sunset as well. And if they're not on the land, you tend to just see that kind of that straight facial shape that you've got there. And that's because if you look at their nose, their eyes, their ears, that's all of their essential things that they need to smell, to see, to hear, and they've got all of those above the water. Everything else is underwater. So their ears, they've got kind of a mechanism, if you like, inside which fold flat to prevent water from entering. They've got a clear eyelid as well, which covers the eye to keep it safe, to help them see underwater, and their nostrils close when they're diving as well. They also have like this kind of fold of skin, if you like, behind their teeth in their mouth, which closes together. I'm sure you can see all my amazing impressions here, by the way, which closes together so that they can grab things underwater with their teeth. They can grab wood and food, but no water gets into their throats. And their teeth, of course, that distinctive yellowy orange that we do see in cartoons, that is actually quite accurate. And they're orange because they're impregnated with iron. So most rodent teeth aren't actually impregnated with iron. And beavers obviously need this iron to keep them nice and strong for coppicing trees and for felling trees in the end. Behind them, they've got this soft dentine, which essentially wears away over time and with use. So they create their own chisels, if you like, as teeth, which is perfect. So as I said, they're perfectly adapted to this semi-aquatic lifestyle, as you can see here. There's no better animal to help us out with wetland engineering than the beaver, because it's completely evolved to do so. It's perfectly evolved to do that brilliant behaviour that we'll have a look at. This is just a rather lovely picture that I thought I'd put in, actually, of a beaver that's grasping its food. And this was actually taken, most of these images and videos were taken up at the Banff Estate in Perthshire, where they've had beavers since 2002, before the Knapdale trial. It's one of the best places where you can go and really enjoy watching beavers. And this image, this was very close, this particular beaver. It just kind of shows the fact that they're kind of a great ecotourism draw as well. So of course we don't want to monopolize wildlife, I suppose, and use it just for money. But when it comes to rural economies and green economies, the beavers can really help us with that, because they're this really charismatic animal that you can get quite close to if you don't disturb them, and they're wonderful to watch. And people really, really do want to go out and watch them. So they're brilliant for ecotourism. When we talk about their food, there's a lot of misconception out there still that beavers eat fish. But there's a lot of cultural references that continue today that imply that beavers eat fish. So there's no wonder that we have these kind of conceptions that beavers might decimate fish stocks by eating them. So this is from the line The Witch and the Wardrobe. Mrs. Beaver serves up fish and chips, if you get it. And this is from a Nintendo game called Animal Crossing, where there's, I haven't played it personally, but there's a family of beavers that host fishing tournaments. And although it's a very small thing, this is a continued misrepresentation in the media and in kind of modern culture today that's emphasising the fact that there might be some human-wildlife conflict just by not getting the truth out. So part of the Cumbria Beaver Group, what we're really keen to do is just get the facts out about beavers. There's no denying that beavers can potentially cause some problems, but it's those that we need to discuss. It's not these mistruths that hopefully we can eradicate. So when it comes to what beavers eat, let me see if I can show another. Oh no. When it comes to what beavers eat, they're entirely herbivorous. So they primarily actually eat terrestrial plants, aquatic plants and semi-aquatic plants. So those just on the kind of border between land and water. And they also graze grass. So if you go to a beaver habitat, they actually have these really tidy beaver lawns, which are really impressive to see and quite confusing. In this wonderfully messy beaver habitat, they've got these wonderfully tidy, pristine lawns as well. So they actually do primarily eat grass in the summer in particular. At this time of year, this is what they're most known for, of course, the felling of trees. They turn to trees. And they're like that kind of soft, the soft bark and the underbark, the wood itself, to eat. So a tree like this is more of a long-term project for a beaver. They tend not to fell trees that are over 1 metre in diameter or so. And when they fell this, they'll eat the branches that are at the top of the tree, which are somewhat softer, and they'll chop the larger branches to use as their building materials for their construction, if you like, that we'll have a look at. So beavers are ecosystem engineers. We'll have a little look into that description first. So there's two kind of key terms associated with beavers: keystone species and ecosystem engineers. So first of all, a keystone species is one which has a greater impact on the overall biodiversity than the mass of that animal would usually allow. And beavers are a keystone species because they're an ecosystem engineer. So they create these incredible wetlands pretty much from scratch. They need very little. They're not high maintenance beavers at all. They do it all themselves. So they engineer these ecosystems, which in turn benefits a huge array of other wetland species, of course, and us as well, which we can have a brief look at. So when it comes to their engineering works, beavers create lodges. So their lodges are where they sleep, where they rear their young, where they actually give birth. And they'll tend to have around 3 chambers, 3 internal chambers, where they do different bits and bobs. So they'll have their young in one, they'll be in one, they'll dry off a little bit in one. But they always have an underwater entrance to avoid predators. So usually they're predators in Europe and what would have been in Britain are wolves, lynx to a certain extent, bears, of course. Otters, though, otters are still a predator for them here. So dog otters will actually try and hunt beaver kits. But if there's an adult beaver around, an otter does not want to mess with an adult beaver. I've seen that on the River Tay. So they tend to avoid them when there's adults around. So they'll use these lodges, or on a wider river system, they might use burrows. And these are, just as you can see here, they've excavated that themselves. They'll shove the mud to the side or on the top, and they'll burrow into the bank itself, and again have several chambers inside. So they tend to have around 2 lodges, or a mix of burrows and lodges, depending on the territory and where they are. So beaver dams, of course, something that they're most known for, and I do have a video for this. So when it comes to beaver dams, so beaver dams are constructed of sticks primarily. They pack in mud really, really tight. This was filmed on the Banff Estate, where one of the dams had actually collapsed, and the beavers fixed it in 3 days, which is very impressive. They work non-stop to maintain these dams continuously, and it's a family effort. it's a family effort in actually maintaining these dams. So it looks quite unusual to us, but these dam structures used to be all across Britain, all across the majority of Europe, and they've gone now. And it kind of goes against our grain of thought that something should restrict the flow of water. But in reality, they're essential, to put it briefly. So these dams, they're leaky dams. It's not like a concrete dam that's just going to build up water behind it. It really slowly leaks out water. It slows the flow of water downstream. And with the increasing kind of flood events that are occurring, a series of dams, if you imagine, if beavers were on various tributaries into large river systems with different territories, you'd have a series of dams, which each of those would slow the flow of water and it would capture water behind it. So the main prerogative of beavers is essentially to store as much water as they can. They want it for themselves because they need a metre of depth to feel secure. So they tend to like to have around a metre or so of depth of water behind each dam. And of course, that compounds all of this water. So it's brilliant to hold water back during flood events. So this particular image here was taken during a flood event in winter, January this year, I think. I've lost all track of time. January this year in the Banff Estate. So not only does it slow the flow of water downstream, you can see how clear this is as well. So this was after passing round about 5 dams, and surrounding this kind of beck, if you like, stream, is farming. It's organic farming, but it's farming nonetheless. And you can see just how clear the water is. So with each dam that it passes through, it provides a natural filtration service as well. So it kind of holds back all of the phosphates and potential sulfates and things like that that might be in the water to help improve water quality downstream. And in turn, that's not it. In turn, that helps with carbon sequestration as well. So ponds, wetlands are actually brilliant for capturing and storing carbon. So we talk quite a lot about trees, but wetlands are absolutely vital to capture the carbon, but most importantly, to keep it there. And beaver pools are vital in doing this. So this is just a beaver pool on the Banff Estate. Again, their lodge is actually in the rhododendron, the green shrubs at the back that you can see there. And this was after one of the storm events which enabled a dam to partially collapse, the one which the beavers fixed in 3 days. And you can just see how much woody debris is poking out of the water there. So beavers stash all of the sticks and logs in the water as winter larders. That's what they'll have right now. They'll be bringing all of the sticks and things in to keep enough food available for them throughout the winter. But in turn, that's brilliant for biodiversity. It provides shelter for invertebrates, freshwater invertebrates like your mayflies, damselflies, dragonflies, midges, mayflies. Have I said mayflies? Anything, you name it. It provides shelter and habitat for it, and shade as well. It provides shade for fish. So parr, the kind of young fish, they tend to set up nurseries in beaver pools because it's nice and shaded with the vegetation that pops up in the water and around that you can see. And we'll have a little look at fish abundance soon. I could go on about beaver ponds a lot, as you can tell. So beavers also create these channels. So this video here is a beaver channeling. So what it's doing there, oops, I think let's just replay that. Start from the beginning. There we go. So what it's doing there, it's creating a channel so that it can stretch its wetland out just that little bit further to access new feeding sources. So they don't like to be over 20 meters away from water usually. And you can see it's pushing out all of that mud and it's deepening the channel by laying it on the side. So you can see how strong beavers are by doing that. Oops. And essentially, this is what they create. So again, this was when one of the floods pushed the dams away, and I was able to actually see the channels. Usually this whole area is flooded. This on the right here, by the way, is a beaver lawn that I mentioned earlier, one of those neat beaver lawns, which is just so bizarre. But it opens up opportunities for flowers, of course. So yes, you can just see here where the water's flooded out, the channels that they create, and they'll stretch it out, and essentially that creates a lot more heterogeneity, or a lot more complexity, if you like, in a wetland system or in a river system. So we're used to these straightened rivers now. That's not it's not natural. They need to be meandering, and they need to have all of these channels in order to help the flow of water slow down and to help all of that biodiversity as well. And beavers just crack on and do it. So if we do want to actually control the height of water in a beaver pool, there's lots of management techniques for beavers. There are far too many for us to fully explore today. But this is a flow device. It's essentially a pipe, as you can see. You'd submerge it to the level that you wanted. You'd submerge the pipe to the level that you wanted the beaver pool to be, the height. And you'll install this kind of mesh around it. And you install this kind of mesh guard around it so that the beavers can dam against the mesh, but because they create leaky dams, it allows enough water to flow through, so that they can't actually block up the pipe, because it's the feel and the sound of flowing water that stimulates beavers to actually create these dams in the first place. So they will want to actually dam it, but if they dam the edge, the water can still get through, and it's perfect. This isn't a hugely costly solution, so hopefully, if and when we do have free-living beavers, this is a solution that we can apply. We'll have a little look at that soon. So the drawn image in the back there, that's the Banff Estate. If you imagine, you can just see the stretch of water. If you imagine, that just used to be a drainage ditch. And the Banff Estate let the beavers do what beavers want to do. And you can see this wonderful wetland that they've created now. There's standing deadwood, there's felled deadwood, look at that lovely herbaceous layer that they've created. There's new tree growth everywhere, because beavers coppice trees. They provide a coppicing service. They don't just fell them and then that's it for the tree, they coppice them. So in turn, really, beavers provide all of these incredible ecosystem services for us, essentially for free. They help to retain water during droughts in these beaver pools, and of course that's brilliant for wildlife. And they slow the flow of water, particularly during peak flood events. And there's actually lots of evidence of this, even in enclosed trials now in Yorkshire. They provide a natural filtration service for us to improve water quality, which is no bad thing given the recent Environment Agency report that was out. And they help with carbon sequestration as well, the ponds and the actual creation of the plants. That lovely shrubby layer, that helps with carbon sequestration too. And that could just be one family of beavers helping all of this, that hopefully we can demonstrate through the Lowther project. And in turn, this could be emphasised throughout Cumbria and potentially throughout England, just with a little bit of government support and by working with stakeholders and the likes of you guys watching. So there are keystone species. Now I could go on about the biodiversity benefits of beavers, for days basically, but at their most basic level, beavers create these wetland habitats so that land or coverage in England now is only 3% wetland coverage, which is just such a drastic decline of what it used to be, whereas around 10% of our species are entirely dependent on wetland habitats. And of course, a whole host of other species are dependent on those for food or interspecies kind of relationships, and we're dependent on them too for this carbon sequestration, for the health of our waters, all sorts of stuff. So beavers help to recreate these wetland habitats for us. As I said, they help with creating habitat for freshwater invertebrates, which then provides food for fish. It provides food for birds when they emerge out of the water. They create standing deadwood habitat as well, because beavers will flood trees and that will in turn kill the trees. But standing deadwood, despite its name, you know, deadwood should definitely be renamed actually. Standing deadwood is alive with just biodiversity brimming from it. So not only do they have a whole host of fungi, they can support owls, you know, so when they actually start to decay, they can support owls. But even in their early stages, when they start to hollow out, woodpeckers could drill the holes in the standing deadwood, and they nest in cavities for a year before moving out, at which point bats, I know that some folk watching might be quite interested in bats move in. So beavers can help to create essentially B&Bs for bats. They create this roosting habitat for them, and then they create all of this freshwater invertebrate life for them to enjoy and feast on in the night. But it's not just that. So fish abundance, the Devon River Otter Beaver Trail report found a 37% increase of fish mass, which is hard to say apparently, of fish mass in beaver pools compared to control sites. So in beaver habitats, there's been an increase of otter presence as well, and herons and kingfishers. There's been an increase as well of water voles, because all of those lovely channels enable water voles to evade potential predatory mink, whereas our straight river channels don't allow our water voles to evade mink as they, well, mink aren't actually native, but as they should be able to naturally to evade other predators, which of course is no bad thing, because our water voles are seriously in decline. When beavers coppice trees, they provide essentially this shrubby undergrowth. Now, shrub habitat is surprisingly rare to come by usually. We tend to have a herbaceous layer, and in our woodlands in particular, or our woodland edges, we lack a lot of that successive shrubby habitat. But it's absolutely vital for our nesting birds. So this was taken on the riverbank in Perthshire again. There were loads of these various nests. There were lots of thrush nests in particular, actually. And there was lots of evidence of sparrowhawks too. So where beavers provide these brilliant food bases, so small mammals will also benefit from these shrubs and small birds, invertebrates. They provide opportunities for all of the other species that depend on those as food bases. So your sparrowhawks, for example, kestrels, you name it. As I said, I could go on about the biodiversity benefits all night, but we have quite a bit to get through. So if you do have questions about that, just pop it in the question box or get in touch with me afterwards. When it comes to beavers and fish, so there is a lot of kind of controversy, I suppose, around beavers and fish. So we've already discussed that beavers don't eat fish, for a start. But there are worries that beaver dams might impact fish migration, particularly salmon or trout. But if we look at case studies across Europe in particular, and North America, but primarily Europe because it's castor fibre, our Eurasian beavers. Norway, for example, so they support 70% of the Atlantic salmon population. And these Atlantic salmon are absolutely vital for the rural fishing or angling industry. So the salmon can usually be found on around about 250 river tributaries, and they share these tributaries, or these river stretches as it is, with 80,000 beavers. And the angling industry in Norway is worth around £127 million a year. So there's actually no evidence that beavers are negatively impacting the angling industry in Europe. Norway is just one example there. And in fact, when Scotland were first looking to reintroduce beavers, they commissioned an ecologist to study the impacts of beavers on fish in Norway. So they got in touch with the fishery departments, and they had no data because they didn't see it as a problem. They didn't see beavers and fish as having a negative relationship. If anything, beaver fish abundance and fish mass, the size of fish, tends to be higher in areas where beavers are. And the same has been found in some areas of Scotland now, and also in some areas of Devon. And I say some areas because we're still at very early stages of beaver reintroductions here, so we can't say things for certain. But case studies across Europe just showcase how we can live alongside beavers and continue these rural economies, and potentially, hopefully, extend them a little bit too through ecotourism. Beavers and trees, of course, we're a nation of tree lovers, woodland lovers, naturally. So we do worry, of course, that beavers are going to fell trees. I know that I have trees that I like to go and visit. I hope some of you guys watching do, otherwise I sound somewhat odd there. But we all have these kind of special trees that, you know, you get a good feeling from. So it can be concerning that beavers are going to fell these trees, or they're going to fell commercial forestry plantations, or even orchards. And the basic answer, as I said, is beavers tend not to like to be away from a water's edge beyond 20 meters or so. So we can plan ahead. So there are actually catchment management programs where you can predict where beavers are going to go depending on the forage available. And you can also predict where they might install dams, which is just by the by. If we did want to protect trees, I do need to change this photo, admittedly, because it's not the best example of a tree guard installation. So you'd install a tree guard, which is chicken wire. It's just chicken wire. And you wouldn't usually wrap it tight around the tree like that, of course. You'd give it a wide enough girth to enable the tree to grow and expand. And it's the easiest mitigation that can be applied to protect trees. And it's the cheapest as well. Another cheap option is actually sand or grit paint that you paint on. We wouldn't like to chew through sandy paint, and beavers are no different. And you can apply these mitigation techniques at very minimal effort, at very minimal cost, but it's hugely effective. One thing you do have to consider, though, is to install these mitigation devices, bearing in mind that it might snow and the snow might compact. So there are some sites where beavers have actually been seen to chew at a really high branch, and they realise that it's because it snowed. So you do actually just have to think about like the snow and things like that. But, you know, we've learnt a lot through Europe and through Scotland and even Devon now to apply these things. I should mention also, actually, that I forgot to mention when I was talking about the dams. So beavers tend to dam low energy drainage ditches primarily. As I said, they want to compound that water and they want to raise the height of water. When it comes to wide river systems, if you think of the Eden or the Lowther even, for example, they wouldn't dam that because it's already got that depth of water. And if they're too fast flowing as well, they'd use the river, sure, they'd be in there, but they'd tend to create a burrow and they wouldn't really, they wouldn't dam it. So we wouldn't expect this kind of drastic river flooding that you might visualize, I suppose, through imagery. They just wouldn't dam these large river systems. It tends to be the tributaries, and that's exactly what these dam capacity models are perfect for, and that's what could be applied for free living beavers. So when it comes to beavers in Britain, this map here is taken from the Beaver Trust website, which they've kindly allowed me to share. I'd recommend you look up the Beaver Trust. So the likes of RSPB and Wildlife Trust and a lot of other organisations work with the Beaver Trust now, and we're engaging as kind of a huge multi-partner affair. We're engaging with Natural England to come up with an England beaver strategy for how we can reinstate these ecosystem engineers, how we can bring them back to our rivers in suitable locations, but most importantly, with suitable management and with localized management and hopefully payment to enable us to live alongside beavers. So yeah, I'd recommend you look at this website in particular. So the website usually would enable you to click on each of these and you can see which project is which. But the red dots are enclosed trials and the green dots are free-living beavers. So there might actually be more free-living beavers than some of you might have expected there. And if we have a bit of a closer look, let's start off in Scotland very briefly. So this little green dot to the left there, this was the very first official beaver reintroduction to Britain. And this was the Knapdale project with Scottish Natural Heritage, the Scottish Wildlife Trusts, the Zoological Society for Scotland, you know, lots of different partners involved in that. And it proved to be very successful with the local community, but the beavers haven't really dispersed much. Now, if you look along to the east, this is what was initially the Tay population. So the Tay population was essentially either, now there isn't actually a word for this, it was either an illegal release or an accidental release. No one quite knows the truth there, but regardless, the beavers appeared on the River Tay. And because there was no community consultation before this, nobody expected it. And if you've been around Perthshire, it's very low-lying farmland, the majority of it. So the beavers got to work doing what they do best, building dams, burrowing into riverbanks, creating lodges, foraging and crops occasionally as they can. And there was huge conflict there, which resulted in a lot of the beavers, unfortunately, being shot and killed because there was no other kind of support available, I suppose, at the time. So in Scotland now, beavers are actually a protected species. So landowners need to apply to Nature Scotland. I think it's Nature Scotland. They've just renamed, sorry. They need to apply for a license in order to kill the beavers, but that is a last resort. It is hopefully going to be a last resort. There's a lot of mitigation that can be applied beforehand, such as installing these flow devices. So Nature Scot now have some beaver officers which are on the ground and they can go out, mitigate the impacts of beavers, and killing the beavers is the very, very last resort. Even before that, beavers from the Tay tend to be translocated to England, and that's where many of our populations, many of our beavers come from. So a lot of the controversy around beavers that I've heard about through my role has been based on this population and the conflict that's arisen there. Now, this population should be considered as, we can learn from it, definitely, but it should definitely be considered as a separate entity, I suppose. There's not going to be a free-living beaver population without any community support, without any community consultation, you know, hopefully in England from now on or in Britain from now on. So it shouldn't be considered. Another concern has also been the South American population of beavers. Now, beavers were never actually native there, so yes, they are causing some havoc in some areas, but they were never native. So again, it's not something that we should be considering. This is a native species returning to Britain, where it existed up until a mere 400 years ago. When we go to the south, again, a lot of enclosed releases here. The little dot that you can see at Exeter, just in the south there, or around Exeter, is the Devon, the free-living population of beavers in Devon on the River Otter. Now, I know that's a bit confusing there, but this population, again, kind of just appeared. And Natural England, when the beavers had kits, Natural England were going to remove the beavers, but the community really fought for them to remain. And through the Devon Wildlife Trust and lots of others, University of Exeter, absolutely masses, they started a 5-year trial to actually record the impacts, beneficial and somewhat potentially negative, to actually record the impacts the beavers were having. And this year, the beavers were permitted to remain there and to expand their range naturally by Natural England. Beavers don't actually have any official legal protection in England yet, so that's something that we need to remedy, of course, if we are to have free-living beavers. But I would recommend strongly that you have a look at some of these dots, and it'll take you to the website. So the Cornwall Beaver Project in particular is a very interesting one. That's on a productive organic farm. And the Beaver Trust have just released a film that Melanie will put in the link called Beavers Without Borders. And some of that was actually filmed at Chris's farm in Cornwall. So do watch that. It's beautifully filmed as well. Much more beautiful than my little presentation here. So when we head up into the north, we're a little bit sparse of beavers currently. So we have 2 enclosed trials in the north. On the right there, that's Cropton Forest, which is managed by Forestry England. They've had kits now, and they've already seen that during peak flood events, there is actually a reduction in peak flow because of the beaver dams into the neighbouring village, which is amazing. Just for one enclosed trial, that is really, really exciting news. And now we have our very own dot here in Cumbria. So this is the Lowther Estate. Look, we've beat everybody else to it. How great is that? This is the Lowther Estate. So let's have a quick look into the Lowther Estate. So prior to lockdown, this is Jim Bliss near the screen here. He's the beaver, well, he's heading up the beaver project, but he's actually the conservation manager for Lowther Estate. So he's heading up the project, and he and I started doing some community consultation, getting people out and listening, hearing all about the project itself and hearing about what a beaver is. And we headed out onto the site itself to look around. So it's 23 acre site, and it's got this kind of lovely woodland copse, which is becoming a wet woodland now that the beavers are there already, and previously grazed pasture, which is looking to be a floodplain already. We removed tree guards and we planted willow. We installed a lodge, a temporary lodge for the beavers, because they need somewhere, of course, to rest when they first arrive. But then lockdown hit, unfortunately, so there was a bit of delay in getting the beavers. But in summer, finally, we had a male called Glenn and a female called Dragonfly. We didn't name them, by the way. I think the estate owner, Jim Lowther, actually wanted Nora, which is brilliant. If we have kits, maybe we'll have Nora. So Dragonfly and Glenn arrived in summer, and they've already started to settle in. So I do have a little film, but I think what I'll do, I do actually have a link for that on my YouTube, which I might send Melanie afterwards, because it's a bit long, or it's on the Cumbria Wildlife Trust YouTube actually, and it's Lowther Estate. So you can take you around the Lowther Estate and you can have a little look. But I want to be able to answer some questions. But let's have a peek inside anyway. So this is the pond that the Lowthers installed prior to the beavers arriving. So this wasn't there already. Like I said, they need that metre depth or so for security to create their larders, and they're wetland animals. They need water. So the trail here is actually a beaver trail. They've already started getting to work. Oh, this was taken, it must have been a month ago or so now. They're already getting to work, pulling the logs in, the sticks and things to create their larder. And they've done some home maintenance as well. So this kind of shrubby bit that you can see at the top left, this is the lodge that they've added mud and sticks too, and they've done essentially some home expansion actually. They've created a new entrance underneath, and just behind it they've created another lodge as well. As soon as Dragonfly arrived, they just got to it. You know, it needed a lady's touch, obviously, and they just got straight to it. So they're really settling in, which is brilliant news, because the last thing you want is any kind of disturbance to the animals, of course. They're settling in perfectly. They've been grazing the grass as well. And they've started on some long-term projects. Now, again, this picture was taken around a month ago, but I went a couple of weeks back, and they'd almost, I bet they'll have felled these trees actually now. They'll have coppiced them entirely. You know, they can fell trees like this within, well, 2 weeks or so usually, if they really put their minds to it, depending how many there are. And again, they'll be felling or chopping off the lovely top branches, dragging them into their pools so that they've got a winter larder. There was a drainage ditch just at the front of the woodland, and they've created a wide channel now, or, you know, relatively wide, given they've just got there. And you can just see their little foot or handprints, if you like, 4 feet, where they've pushed the mud to the side, and they're deepening that channel so that they can move between the woodland. And all throughout the woodland now, they've started to establish these channels. And when you walk through, it never used to be quite so wet, but it's really wet now, which is brilliant. Hopefully we can see what biodiversity has altered in there next year. And they've created a dam. Well, when I took this, it was a relatively modest dam, but it's a dam nonetheless. And me and Jim were really excited to see this. So when I took this, there hadn't been much rain, but I visited 2 weeks after or so, and they'd raised the height of it because there'd been quite heavy rain for a couple of days running, and they'd added like a curve just to the right-hand side. So when they create a dam, they tend not to like it to be too straight. They like it to have a bit of a wobble, and that helps with, you know, if there's a strong flow of water, it helps to kind of strengthen it a bit. So they're really, really getting to work now. And this is the 3rd dam, just in this drainage ditch. To the left of this image, there's a floodplain, so we're expecting to monitor carbon sequestration in this particular area. And further up, oh, that's just a closer image of the dam. Further up, they're working with the University of Lancaster to monitor flow during peak flood events. So it's not just the matter that we've got beavers back in Cumbria now. We're doing a lot of kind of research behind it, just to see what impact that they might have on an upland farmed landscape, and working with surrounding landowners, of course, and things like that. If you do want to look at some more beaver-related literature, I really recommend reading the River Otter Beaver Trail Evidence Report. That's available on the Devon Wildlife Trust website. I really, really recommend reading that. So it's got the impacts, the social impacts, the economic impacts, all of the benefits, how they mitigated some of the negative benefits at ease. Really recommend reading that. If you're on Twitter, these are some of the accounts that you can follow. I'm Farah Heather, and we have at Cumbria Beavers as well. And for literature, Derek Gow, Beaver King, for lack of a better phrase, he's been reintroducing beavers around Britain pretty much, well, yes, from the beginning. He's just released a book, Bringing Back the Beaver, which tells his side of the story of the beaver reintroduction to Britain. And the Eurasian Beaver Handbook by Roisin Campbell-Palmer, who won the Conservation Award at Nature Scot last night, by the way, Nature Scotland Awards. That lists in detail all of the mitigation that can be applied when we want to reintroduce beavers to a landscape. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's got a British tilt, of course. So I really recommend that, the Eurasian Beaver Handbook. And the others are just lovely things to read. Eager by Ben Goldfarb, which is an American story, essentially, of how they changed the landscape, quite literally, historically, beavers. And Nature's Architect by Jim Crumley as well, of course. If you do want tips on other literature, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll have a look at some questions. You can visit us at cumbriabeavers.org.uk. Send an email, it'll come to me, but I can direct you to whoever you wanting to deal with, whether it's Lowther, whether it's the Beaver Group, info@cumbriabeavers.org.uk, and we're on Twitter as well, @CumbriaBeavers. So, let's see. Oh, let's see if I've got some questions. So Ben's asking, what's the maximum number of beavers? What's the maximum number of beavers the Lowther estate can cope with? And can families live next door to each other? How far apart do they need to live? So beaver territories can vary entirely, just like other wildlife, as I'm sure you're aware, depending on food resources and things. But when it comes to the actual enclosed trial at the Lowther estate, which is a 5-year enclosed trial, they can support up to 6 beavers. Oops. So if they did have more, lots of questions coming through, sorry, I've lost yours. If they did have more kits beyond the maximum number of 6 individual beavers, they could be well translocated to other enclosed trial releases. By that point, we might have free living beavers. We literally don't know at this stage. I'll try and get through these. Are they endemic to Britain? So beavers, Eurasian beavers are native to Britain. Eurasian beavers, so the initial stock, if you like, came from Norway, particularly in Scotland to begin with. So we have had to bring, I say we, initially they had to bring across beavers from Europe to bring Eurasian beavers back to Britain. But yes, they're entirely native, just 400 years ago. What's the largest rodent in Europe? That's the capybara. Look it up, it's monstrous. It's brilliantly monstrous. If beavers became extinct, how are we able to reintroduce them? So yeah, just literally bringing them across from Europe. There's a lot of kind of health checks that they have to go through. They can get certain pathogens and tapeworms and things like that. So whenever a beaver is translocated, it goes through quite intense, I suppose, health checks to make sure that it's got none of these things. So all beavers from Europe initially were tested for this. Any that are translocated around Britain are tested again, just in case. Does the clear eyelid enable them to focus underwater? You know, I've been asked that before, and I don't know if it enables them to focus. It just enables them to see. But Chris, you've caught me out. I am going to have to double check that and get a much more scientific answer. Where beavers eat bark of a large tree that they do not fell, do they completely ring bark the tree and therefore kill it? So they tend to work on one side. They wouldn't necessarily ring bark it like a grey squirrel, for example. But when they fell the tree, it doesn't kill it, I suppose. It coppices it, and it provides that coppicing service for it to grow back. Depending on the tree and depending on the size of the tree at the time that it's felled, it'll grow back either as a more shrubby kind of layer or just as a I don't know how to say it, as a large tree. Sorry, not very scientific. I'm trying to get through in enough time. Do they need to have a wooded environment to survive, and can they help to manage a wetland area without them? So beavers do rely quite heavily on trees, particularly for their winter forage. So that it doesn't need to be a heavily wooded area, but they need enough willow in particular, aspen, birch, things like that, all of which are kind of successional and pioneering wetland tree species that regrow rapidly. So they need quite a lot of that. They don't necessarily need like a mature or even a semi-mature woodland. And can they help to manage a wetland area without them? I think you mean, can the beavers help to manage a wetland area? Essentially, but yeah, they do need those trees as well as kind of herbaceous plants. Why would you want to control height of dams? Surely they can't make them very high. So it's not necessarily controlling the height of the dams as such. It's controlling the level of the water. It's hard to explain over this with that pipe, with that flow device that I mentioned. So on low-lying farmland, it can flood across, or if there's a public footpath, for example, it could flood across. And you can actually, one of the mitigation tools is to alter the height of the dam itself. But I mean, it would be recommended to install a flow device instead, because it's the beaver's natural behaviour to want to manage these dams according to what they see fit. So installing a flow device would benefit everybody. Beavers in Yorkshire, please can you confirm and where? Yes, so it's the Cropton Forest, managed by Forestry England, which is near Pickering. It's a private enclosed site, so the Lowther Estate too is a private enclosed site. We are hoping to have some kind of open days, but if you get in touch kind of with their forestry team, I think they do enable some tours. What happens to beaver populations longer term without any natural predators? It's a good question. As with most populations, particularly rodents, when they reach their peak carrying capacity, they tend to level out, but that's the only answer I have for that currently. How is carbon sequestration measured? You know what, you are asking the wrong person. I'm far not clever enough for that. It's like magic to me. It's something that I'm trying to understand, but you could email info@cumbriabeavers.org.uk and I'll pass it on to Jim Bliss, who will then tell you who they're working with in order to do that science magic. Answered that one. Is one pair of beavers sufficient to produce a diverse gene pool? So it's an ongoing question, that, but there has been a recent study by Dr. Roisin Campbell-Palmer on the tay population, and she's essentially found that because they're essentially rodents, they can last quite a long time with minimal genetic diversity, I suppose. We are advocating for the reintroduction or the restocking of beavers from different sites in Europe, but unfortunately the government doesn't allow this currently. It's an ongoing issue. How old are the beavers you have introduced and how long do they live? You know, I don't actually know the age of these ones. I would predict that they're about 5 years old. But I'll have to check with Roisin with that. And they live generally to around about 12 years or so. Is it possible to visit the Lowther beavers? So not currently, they're just letting them settle in, get reacquainted and set up their home. But we are hoping to have kind of guided tours, very small groups next year. If you send me an email to info@cumbriabeavers.org.uk, we've got a little list ongoing in the hope that we can host these little events. So I'll add you to that list, Susan. Any more Cumbrian sites being considered at present? Yeah, so the Cumbria Beaver Group work with any landowners or estates who might be interested in the reintroduction of beavers. Some of them would prefer it to remain to themselves for the time being, just while they're exploring different options. So hopefully we can get some more news out at some point in the near future. How do Eurasian beavers differ from their North American cousins? There's a couple of kind of anatomical differences, and also in their behaviour. It's a bit varied to go into at the minute, but it's not massively, but North American beavers tend to work on wider wetland habitats. Got that one. Do adults teach the young how to build dams and lodges, or is it instinctive? So there's a lot of videos online currently of beavers who, that have been rehomed in kind of animal sanctuaries as kits. And they weren't taught to create dams, but I know this is a very strange anecdote, But they've been in these people's homes and they've been dragging chairs, they've been dragging shoes, they've been dragging whatever the heck they can find to dam between doorways. So it must be quite an instinctive habit. So that it usually is the feel and the sound of flowing water that stimulates beavers to create these dams. But there must be something even more instinctive that they want to gather these materials and dam gaps, essentially. So it is quite interesting, actually. Okay to share this talk with others. It's been great, thank you. Thanks, Sam. We'll have to ask Melanie that one. I'm not entirely sure. I wouldn't have thought you couldn't. Is the River Eden likely to be explored for beaver reintroduction? The Eden floods regularly. So I don't think currently there's been like a catchment map analysis done of any large river systems because we're not anticipating to have free living beavers just yet. But there's, in my opinion, the River Eden is quite perfect for beavers, but we would want to see them on the tributaries, so these smaller input channels where the beavers can actually have a wider effort on, or a wider impact on slowing the flow of water before they reach the Eden. Thank you for an interesting talk. You're welcome, Emma. Which bark from which trees are their favourite to eat? Yeah, they love willow, very, very much. Birch, aspen. They don't really like conifer trees. They much prefer broadleaf, so they tend not to fell conifer, which is brilliant for our forestry industry. Am I correct in thinking that capybaras are native to South America and are culled if present in the UK? I have absolutely no idea, Charles. Are there capybaras in the UK? I don't know. Well, you've taught me something there. I'm going to have to look that up. But I think, let me just scroll through. I think that that is our last question, and I'm just going to double check the chat. Oh, so many comments. Crikey, so many comments. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to double check. Got that one. Sorry, folks, do put if you've got any more questions. I'm just trying to go through just in case. River Eden, got that one. I think that's everything. Yeah, I think that's everything. Well, that's it, guys. I hope you've enjoyed the talk, and do get in touch with us at Cumbria Beavers, of course. If you do want to hopefully come on a kind of Lowther guided tour next year in spring, potentially, get in touch, info@cumbriabeavers.org.uk, and I'll add you to the list. Fingers crossed we can actually do that with everything going on. And loads of thanks coming through. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for taking up your time tonight and finding out about, someone's saying I've got a Cumbrian twang, that's new. Thanks for finding out about our latest residents. But enjoy your evening, everybody. See you soon. Oh. She says, trying to end the talk.